To build a better Bay Area. Tonight, we're looking at a mile-long stretch of road in Marin County that has come in many ways to symbolize the Bay Area's growing housing crisis. This crisis only worsened through the pandemic. RV after RV, car after car parked here because people have nowhere else to go.
12 million layoffs didn't happen slowly. They happened quietly, then all at once. Across America, workers didn't move into new jobs. They moved into RVs, vans, and parking lots. This isn't lifestyle living. This is what happens when housing collapses faster than people can recover. The claim of 12,000 layoffs represents combined mass layoffs across multiple sectors between late 2024 and 2026. This wave hit tech, logistics, retail, construction, healthcare support, trucking, and manufacturing simultaneously. What makes this different is speed. Workers received 2 weeks' notice or less, with severance reduced or eliminated entirely. Unemployment insurance couldn't keep pace. Most states provide $275 to $450 weekly, while average national rent exceeds $1,800 monthly. For households already spending 50 to 60% of income on housing, even brief income disruption triggers immediate housing loss. This layoff wave overlapped with credit tightening. Credit card. Limits were cut, personal loan approvals dropped, and interest rates remained elevated. This removed the final safety net most families relied on during past recessions. What followed wasn't shelter entry, it was vehicle living. RVs, vans, box trucks, and fifth wheels became emergency housing because they require no credit checks, no deposits, and no landlord approval. This shift happened in weeks, not years. Unlike prior downturns where families had months to adjust, this crisis moved with unprecedented speed. The economic damage happened quietly across different industries, but the housing impact arrived all at once. This explains why the RV homeless surge appears sudden. The pipeline from employment to homelessness compressed from months into days, catching social services, cities, and families completely unprepared for the scale and speed of displacement. In past economic downturns, layoffs didn't immediately equal homelessness. Today they do, because housing has zero. Elasticity. Median rents rose over 30% since 2020, while wages grew far slower. Savings buffers disappeared. Roughly 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, meaning a single missed rent payment triggers eviction risk. Eviction timelines shorten dramatically. In many states, tenants face removal within 30 to 45 days after missed payments. That's insufficient time to secure new employment, relocate, or downsize responsibly. Shared housing collapsed simultaneously. Room rentals now cost $800 to $1,200, often requiring background checks and income verification unemployed workers cannot provide. RVs become the only immediate option. Used RVs can be purchased for $8,000 to $25,000, often using cash, tax refunds, or retirement withdrawals. Unlike apartments, RVs don't require proof of income. They provide privacy, mobility, and perceived safety compared to shelters. But this transition isn't planned. Most new RV dwellers lack hookups, legal parking, or maintenance. Funds. They enter RV living already in crisis, not as lifestyle choice. That's why breakdowns, fines, and displacement happen fast. This pipeline from job loss to RV living has become direct and unavoidable. Housing no longer absorbs economic shocks, it shatters under them. The safety mechanisms that once prevented homelessness, rental assistance, family loans, affordable alternatives, have all disappeared simultaneously, creating a perfect storm where unemployment equals immediate vehicle dwelling. Official homelessness counts dramatically understate what's happening. RV dwellers are largely excluded from federal and local statistics. HUD counts prioritize shelters and unsheltered street populations, not people sleeping in registered vehicles. This means hundreds of thousands of RV residents are statistically invisible. Cities often classify RV dwellers as vehicular residents, not homeless. This technical distinction removes them from funding formulas, emergency aid programs, and housing assistance eligibility. Resources shrink while the problem grows. School districts report rising numbers of students without permanent addresses. Employers quietly acknowledge workers sleeping in parking lots. Hospitals document increases in patients listing post office boxes or no address. Yet official homelessness numbers remain nearly flat. This invisibility fuels policy denial. If numbers don't show growth, officials claim the crisis is exaggerated. Meanwhile, entire neighborhoods of RVs form overnight on industrial roads, dead malls, and abandoned lots. These areas exist in legal gray zones, tolerated temporarily, then abruptly cleared. The public perceives RV dwellers as travelers or retirees, not displaced workers. This misunderstanding delays intervention and hardens enforcement responses. By the time action occurs, displacement has already multiplied. This is why RV homelessness feels sudden and unmanageable. It was growing off record for years, and now it's impossible to ignore. The gap between reality and official data has created a situation where cities are unprepared for a crisis they didn't know existed until it overwhelmed their enforcement capacity. One critical change driving RV homelessness is the collapse of corporate severance and public assistance coverage. During earlier downturns, layoffs often included 3 to 6 months of severance and extended benefits. Today, severance is frequently 2 weeks, or nothing at all. Many layoffs are framed as role eliminations or performance restructuring, limiting eligibility. Unemployment systems are overwhelmed. Processing delays stretch 6 to 10 weeks in some states. During that gap, families receive zero income while rent, insurance, utilities, and debt payments continue. Emergency assistance programs are capped or exhausted. Waiting lists for housing vouchers stretch into years, not months. Nonprofits are also overwhelmed. Food banks report double-digit demand increases, while rental assistance funds are depleted early each fiscal year. There is no bridge period anymore. Once income stops, housing collapses immediately. This leaves RV living as the only self-directed solution. No approvals required, no wait lists, no paperwork delays, but it shifts the burden entirely onto individuals who must now manage fuel costs, repairs, legal compliance, and constant relocation without support. The traditional safety net, unemployment insurance, severance packages, emergency assistance operated on the assumption that economic disruption was temporary and households had savings. Both assumptions are now false. The system no longer cushions economic failure, it accelerates housing loss. For displaced workers, the gap between job loss and vehicle dwelling has collapsed to mere weeks. Just as demand for RV living explodes, legal places to live in RVs are vanishing. Across the country, long-term RV parks are closing due to land redevelopment, insurance increases, zoning changes, and rising property taxes. Many parks are being sold for warehouses, apartments, or storage facilities. Insurance premiums for RV parks increased by 30 to 60%, forcing owners to close or shift to short-term tourism only. Monthly residents are being evicted with 30 to 90 days' notice, often with nowhere else to go. New RV parks are rarely approved due to zoning resistance and community opposition. Waiting lists now stretch 6 to 12 months in many regions. Monthly rates surged from $400 to $700 to $1,000 to $500, eliminating affordability entirely. Utilities once included are now metered separately. This creates a trap. People are pushed into RVs by layoffs, but blocked from legal places to live in them. The result is street parking, industrial zones, and constant enforcement pressure. RV living is no longer a low-cost housing alternative. It's a high-risk survival strategy in a system that removed all legal footing. The convergence of park closures and rising homelessness has created impossible math. Cities face thousands of displaced RV residents with only dozens of legal parking spaces available. This mismatch guarantees enforcement conflicts and accelerating displacement, regardless of individual compliance efforts. As RV homelessness expands, cities are responding with law enforcement instead of housing solutions. Since 2023, hundreds of municipalities have passed or revived vehicle dwelling bans, overnight parking restrictions, and no habitation ordinances. These laws often prohibit sleeping in a vehicle for more than 2 to 4 hours, regardless of location. Fines range from $75 to $1,000 per citation, with vehicles subject to towing after repeated violations. Towing fees alone can exceed $2,500, instantly destroying someone's last shelter. In many cities, impound yards hold vehicles for 30 days, after which they're auctioned, effectively turning homelessness into asset seizure. What makes this dangerous is enforcement timing. Laws are applied suddenly, with no transition zones and no legal parking alternatives offered. RV residents are forced into constant movement, burning fuel, risking breakdowns, and accumulating citations they cannot pay. Court challenges exist, but enforcement continues during litigation. For displaced workers living in RVs, this creates a cycle where legal compliance becomes impossible. You can't legally park, but you also can't afford to move. This isn't about public safety, it's about displacement. Cities are pushing RV homelessness out of sight, not resolving it. The result is increased instability, deeper poverty, and faster collapse for people already on the edge. The criminalization approach costs cities millions in enforcement, towing, court processing, and cleanup, yet produces zero housing solutions. Meanwhile, RV residents cycle between jurisdictions, burning resources and accumulating legal problems that make future housing access even more difficult. For decades, big box stores, warehouses, and truck stops functioned as unofficial emergency housing zones. That has ended. Since 2022, major corporations have quietly updated parking policies banning overnight stays, even for RVs that are insured and registered. The shift wasn't announced publicly. It happened through corporate liability reviews, insurance pressure, and city agreements. Once allowed, parking lots now enforce zero-tolerance rules with private security and local police cooperation. This change removed tens of thousands of safe overnight spots nationwide almost overnight. For RV dwellers, it eliminated predictable rest zones where they could sleep legally without harassment. Now, even stopping for rest risks citations or trespassing charges. Truck stops followed the same path. Increased congestion, local complaints, and zoning pressure forced operators to prioritize short-term fueling over overnight stays. Many now limit parking to 2 to 3 hours, even for paying customers. The impact is massive but invisible. RV residents must now rotate constantly, often driving 20 to 50 miles per night searching for safe locations. Fuel costs rise, exhaustion increases, accidents become more likely. This policy shift didn't reduce homelessness, it made it more dangerous. What used to be a temporary survival strategy has been stripped away, leaving RV residents with fewer legal options than ever before. The elimination of informal overnight zones forces continuous movement, transforming vehicle dwelling from stationary shelter into exhausting, expensive, dangerous migration. This crisis isn't dominated by the unemployed or chronically homeless. The fastest-growing segment of RV homelessness is working adults and retirees. Many still have jobs. Others lost high-skill positions and fell fast due to housing costs. School districts report increasing numbers of children living in vehicles. Healthcare systems document nurses and aides sleeping in RVs near hospitals. Logistics hubs see truck drivers and warehouse workers living on site in converted rigs. Fixed-income retirees are also being pushed out. With Social Security averaging around $1,900 per month, rising rents make housing impossible. RVs become the last controllable expense, but only temporarily. These populations don't qualify for traditional homeless services. They're often excluded from shelters due to employment schedules, family size, or vehicle ownership. Assistance programs are not designed for people who still look stable. That's why the crisis remains misunderstood. These individuals blend into society during the day and disappear at night. They aren't visible in encampments, but they are everywhere. RV homelessness is no longer a fringe condition. It's a structural failure pulling in people who never expected to be here. Teachers, nurses, construction workers, and retirees are becoming vehicle dwellers, not because they made poor choices, but because housing costs increased faster than any wage or benefit. Adjustment. The demographic shift reveals this isn't a personal failure crisis, it's a systemic housing collapse affecting previously stable populations. As demand for emergency housing rises, the RV market itself has become unstable. Used RV prices initially dropped due to distressed selling, then rebounded sharply as displaced families rushed to buy. This created artificial scarcity at the low end. Affordable, functional RVs under $15,000 now sell within days. Many require thousands in repairs, roof leaks, electrical failures, plumbing issues that new owners can't afford. Financing is often unavailable or predatory, with interest rates exceeding 10 to 14%. Insurance companies are tightening underwriting. Older RVs are increasingly denied coverage or restricted to storage only, making them illegal to drive or park on public roads. Premiums have risen 20 to 40%, further squeezing owners. Repairs are another trap. RV service backlogs stretch weeks or months, and labor rates rival automotive dealerships. A single breakdown can strand a family indefinitely. Instead of providing stability, RV ownership often accelerates financial collapse. What looks like a housing solution becomes a high-risk liability with no safety margin. The RV market wasn't built for mass housing demand, and it's failing under the pressure. Buyers desperate for shelter overlook mechanical problems, purchase without inspections, and enter ownership with no emergency funds. The result is a secondary crisis, where the shelter itself becomes the source of financial destruction, trapping families in depreciating assets they can neither repair nor legally operate. Municipal responses now follow a predictable pattern: tolerance, complaints, enforcement, clearance. RV communities are allowed to form briefly, then dismantled through sweeps. Notices give 24 to 72 hours to leave, with no relocation support. After sweeps, RV residents scatter, often regrouping elsewhere until the cycle repeats. This constant displacement prevents stability, employment retention, and access to services. It also destroys trust between communities and authorities. Crucially, cities rarely designate legal RV zones. When they do, capacity is limited to dozens of spaces for populations numbering in the thousands. Waiting lists grow while enforcement continues. This approach costs more than it saves. Towing, policing, cleanup, and court processing consume millions annually without reducing homelessness. The absence of a long-term strategy ensures the crisis grows. RV homelessness is being managed as a nuisance, not a housing emergency. And until that changes, displacement will continue to accelerate. Cities spend enormous resources moving the problem around rather than addressing root causes. Each sweep disrupts employment, scatters children from schools, and breaks community support networks that help people survive. The cycle of displacement actually increases costs while worsening outcomes. Some cities have spent over $5,000 annually on sweeps and enforcement, enough to house hundreds of families. Yet the RV homeless population continues growing because no housing alternative exists. Fuel has become one of the most destructive hidden pressures in RV homelessness. Unlike rent, fuel costs fluctuate weekly, making budgeting impossible. Even modest RVs average 8 to 12 miles per gallon. At $4 per gallon, driving just 30 miles per day, often required to avoid parking enforcement, can cost $300 to $450 per month in fuel alone. For people already living on unemployment, part-time wages, or fixed income, fuel becomes the deciding factor between compliance and violation. If you can't afford to move, you risk citations. If you move, you burn money needed for food or repairs. Fuel inflation also eliminates seasonal migration as a survival strategy. In the past, RV dwellers moved to lower-cost regions. Now the cost of relocating across states can exceed $1,000, making mobility a liability instead of an advantage. This traps RV residents in hostile jurisdictions with aggressive enforcement. Fuel, once a manageable expense, now actively accelerates housing instability. RV homelessness isn't stationary, it's expensive motion forced by policy. And fuel is the meter running nonstop. The irony is brutal. Laws force constant movement to avoid parking violations, but movement itself costs money displaced workers don't have. Every mandatory relocation burns fuel that could have bought food or paid for repairs. The enforcement system creates a financial death spiral where compliance itself drives people toward total collapse. Mechanical failure is often the final breaking point. RVs are complex systems combining automotive, electrical, plumbing, and structural components. Repairs are expensive and slow. Average RV labor rates range from $150 to $200 per hour, with wait times of weeks or months. Common failures, roof leaks, slide malfunctions, electrical shorts, transmission issues can cost $2,000 to $10,000 to fix. Most RV homeless households have no emergency fund. When a breakdown happens, the RV becomes immobile, instantly illegal to park in many cities. Towing a disabled RV can cost $500 to $2,000, often exceeding the vehicle's value. Once immobilized, RV residents face citations, towing threats, or forced abandonment. This is how RV homelessness turns into street homelessness. A single mechanical failure erases the last barrier between shelter and exposure. The system provides no repair assistance, no emergency parking for disabled RVs, and no mechanical relief programs. One broken part can erase everything. RVs weren't designed for full-time living under financial stress. Components wear faster, routine maintenance gets deferred, small problems become catastrophic failures. A $200 repair ignored becomes a $5,000 breakdown. For families already spending every dollar on fuel and food, preventive maintenance is impossible. This creates a predictable cascade where vehicle failure becomes inevitable, and when it happens, there's no safety net to prevent complete housing loss. Legal RV living depends on compliance, registration, plates, inspections, insurance. But compliance costs are rising faster than incomes. Registration fees, emissions requirements, and inspection failures prevent renewal. Once expired, an RV becomes a tow target. In some states, registration and penalties can exceed $1,000 for lapsed compliance. If insurance is denied or canceled, the RV cannot legally move. This creates a legal deadlock. You must move to avoid fines, but you can't move legally. Many RV residents lose compliance due to missed mail, lack of permanent address, or inability to pay renewal fees. This isn't negligence, it's administrative exclusion. Once compliance is lost, recovery is rare. Vehicles are towed, impounded, and eventually sold. This is how asset loss becomes permanent homelessness. The legal system assumes stability. RV homelessness exists precisely because stability is gone. Every administrative requirement, registration renewal, insurance verification, address confirmation assumes access to resources homeless populations lack. Without a mailing address, renewal notices never arrive. Without income verification, insurance gets denied. Without inspection stations accessible by immobile RVs, compliance becomes impossible. The regulatory framework designed to ensure road safety has become a mechanism for asset seizure, where administrative barriers transform vehicle dwellers into violators regardless of intent. Compliance isn't difficult. It's structurally impossible for people living in crisis. Health outcomes among RV homeless populations are deteriorating rapidly. Lack of refrigeration disrupts medications. Limited access to sanitation increases infection risk. Chronic stress elevates cardiovascular and immune conditions. Without stable addresses, medical follow-ups collapse. Missed appointments lead to dropped care. Preventive treatment disappears. Emergency rooms become the default provider, increasing costs and worsening outcomes. Mental health decline is significant. Constant movement, fear of enforcement, and uncertainty produce anxiety, insomnia, and depression. Substance use rises not as a cause, but as a coping response. Healthcare systems are seeing this pattern, but not naming it. RV homelessness creates medical invisibility, where deterioration occurs quietly until crisis intervention is required. This is a public health issue disguised as a parking problem. Chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and asthma become unmanaged without stable housing. Insulin requires refrigeration. Blood pressure monitoring requires routine. Asthma management requires clean environments. None of these exist in vehicle dwelling. The result is preventable hospitalizations costing tens of thousands of dollars, far exceeding what stable housing would have cost. Hospitals discharge patients back to RVs, where conditions immediately worsen again. The cycle repeats until acute crisis occurs. Public health costs are rising while the population causing them remains invisible in official data, creating a gap where spending increases but solutions never materialize. Children living in RVs face disruptions that compound long-term harm. School enrollment requires addresses. Transportation becomes inconsistent. Attendance drops. Academic performance declines. School districts report rising numbers of highly mobile students, a known risk factor for long-term educational failure. These children often lose access to free meals, counseling, and special services due to instability. Child services are rarely triggered because families still appear housed. RVs mask homelessness in official systems. Support arrives late or never. This creates a generation growing up without routine, privacy, or security. The long-term cost far exceeds any housing intervention. RV homelessness doesn't just displace families, it derails futures. Educational research shows highly mobile students fall an average of 4 to 6 months behind academically for each school transfer. Children in RVs often change schools multiple times per year as families relocate to avoid enforcement. They lose friendships, fall behind in curricula, and develop anxiety that further impairs learning. Teachers can't provide continuity. Parents can't support homework without stable workspace or internet access. By the time these children reach high school, many are so far behind that graduation becomes unlikely. The educational damage from childhood RV homelessness creates lifetime economic disadvantage, perpetuating poverty across generations. The cost of intervention now is a fraction of the social cost later. The most dangerous shift is normalization. RV homelessness is no longer transitional. With housing costs high, safety nets weak, and enforcement aggressive, exit pathways are disappearing. People are staying in RV homelessness for years, not months. Skills erode, health declines, assets vanish. Re-entry into traditional housing becomes impossible due to credit damage and eviction records. What emerges is a permanent mobile underclass, working, aging, invisible, and excluded. This is not an emergency phase. It's a structural failure hardening into place. Without intervention, RV homelessness stops being a crisis and becomes a system. The transformation from temporary displacement to permanent condition happens through accumulated barriers, credit scores destroyed by unpaid citations, employment gaps from constant relocation, health problems from years without stable care, legal records from parking violations. Each year in RV homelessness adds barriers that make exit harder. Eventually, traditional housing becomes inaccessible, regardless of income improvement. Landlords reject applicants with recent vehicle dwelling. Background checks reveal citation histories. Credit requirements eliminate anyone who fell behind. What began as emergency response calcifies into permanent status. America is creating a new housing class, people who work, contribute, and participate in society, but will never again qualify for traditional housing. This isn't a temporary crisis requiring emergency response. It's a permanent restructuring of how millions of Americans will live for the remainder of their lives. When work no longer guarantees housing, the system has already failed.
A long line of trailers and motorhomes goes on and on and on, stretching for about a mile. Located just minutes away from some of the wealthiest zip codes in the country, this growing RV encampment has come to symbolize the haves and the have-nots in this.
Homeless RV owners are getting their chance to take their frustrations to court.
They say the city is unfairly ticketing them and forcing them to constantly keep on the move.
Tonight, somewhere in America, a family will fall asleep in a car, not because they failed, but because rent became impossible. The cost of living crisis has turned vehicles into homes for millions of Americans who still work, still pay taxes, and still follow the rules. But the rules changed, and now survival itself is being pushed to the edge. Since 2020, rent in America has risen at a pace that wages simply cannot match. National data shows median asking rents increased roughly 20 to 30% in just 4 years, while real wages after inflation barely moved or even declined for many workers. In practical terms, a $1,200 apartment in 2020 now costs $1,550 to $1,700 in many cities. Meanwhile, the average annual wage increase during that same period was often 2 to 4%, far below rent inflation. Landlords also raised income requirements. Many now require tenants to earn 3 to 3.5 times the rent, meaning a $1,600 apartment demands an income of $57,600 per year. Millions of full-time workers, especially in retail, logistics, healthcare support, and service jobs, do not meet that threshold. Even dual-income households are failing screening algorithms. This disconnect forces people into impossible choices. When rent consumes 45 to 60% of take-home pay, there is no buffer for medical bills, car repairs, or job interruptions. Missing one paycheck is enough to trigger eviction or non-renewal. Once evicted, credit damage makes re-entry into the rental market nearly impossible. Living in a car or RV becomes a financial survival tactic, not a lifestyle choice. It removes rent from the equation while preserving mobility and access to work. This is not a fringe issue. It is the mathematical outcome of housing costs rising faster than income across most of America. The current cost of living crisis is magnified by mass layoffs across multiple industries. Between 2023 and 2025, layoffs in tech, logistics, manufacturing, retail, and transportation totaled well over 1.5 million jobs. Many of these workers were not living paycheck to paycheck by choice, but by necessity due to high housing costs. When someone loses income today, the timeline to homelessness is brutally short. Most Americans have less than 3 months of savings, and in many cases far less. With rents already consuming half of monthly income, a single missed paycheck can cause immediate housing instability. Unemployment benefits often cover only 30 to 50% of prior income and take weeks to process. Landlords rarely wait. Non-payment notices go out within days, and lease non-renewals follow quickly. Unlike past recessions, downsizing is no longer an option. Cheaper apartments no longer exist in many metro areas. Waiting lists for subsidized housing stretch months or years, not weeks. At that point, vehicles become emergency housing. People sleep in cars, vans, and RVs while trying to stabilize income, attend interviews, or keep existing jobs. Vehicle living allows someone to stay near employment centers instead of being forced into distant shelters or overcrowded shared housing. This is why vehicle homelessness is growing among people who were recently employed. It is not driven by addiction or long-term poverty. It is driven by layoffs colliding with an unaffordable housing market that offers no second chances. Even when people find an apartment they can theoretically afford, move-in costs have become an insurmountable barrier. In many U.S. cities, renters must now provide first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit, sometimes equal to another full month. For a modest $1,600 unit, that means $4,800 up front. In higher-cost areas, upfront costs routinely exceed $7,000 to $9,000. For households already struggling with inflation, this money simply does not exist. Grocery prices are up 20 to 25% since 2020. Auto insurance premiums have surged, and credit card interest rates often exceed 25% APR. Using credit to secure housing only delays collapse and increases long-term debt. Even assistance programs are overwhelmed. Emergency rental assistance funds dry up quickly, and eligibility rules exclude many working households who earn too much on paper but still cannot save thousands of dollars. Charities rarely cover full move-in costs, leaving people trapped. Vehicle living removes this upfront barrier. A paid-off car or used RV requires no deposit, no credit check, and no proof of income. Fuel and maintenance costs are predictable compared to sudden rent hikes or lease termination fees. This shift is structural. Housing is no longer gated by monthly affordability alone. It is gated by access to large sums of cash up front. For millions of Americans, that gate is permanently closed, making vehicles the only immediately accessible form of shelter. For many Americans, a vehicle is the final asset left after housing becomes unaffordable. When rent consumes income and savings are depleted, selling the car is not an option. It is the only thing enabling survival. Without a vehicle, people lose access to work, healthcare, food, and basic safety. A paid-off car or RV represents mobility, shelter, and independence combined. Even a financed vehicle often has lower monthly costs than rent. A $450 car payment plus fuel is still cheaper than a $1,700 apartment with utilities. This math is forcing people to repurpose vehicles as living spaces. RVs, vans, and SUVs are especially appealing because they provide insulation, storage, and privacy. Older RVs can be purchased for $5,000 to $15,000, far less than the cash required to move into an apartment. For families or seniors, RVs offer space that cars cannot. However, this strategy is fragile. Repairs, breakdowns, and mechanical failures instantly threaten housing stability. There is no landlord to call, no maintenance coverage, and no safety net. One transmission failure can erase a person's home overnight. Still, millions are making this choice because the alternative is worse. Vehicles are not becoming homes because people want them to be, but because the traditional housing system has priced vast segments of the population out entirely. When your car becomes your last line of defense against complete homelessness, you hold onto it no matter what. Living in a car or RV is often portrayed as cheap, but rising costs are rapidly eroding that assumption. Auto insurance premiums have increased 20 to 25% nationwide, with some states seeing even higher spikes. Registration fees, emissions requirements, and inspection costs add hundreds more per year. Fuel prices remain volatile, and vehicle dwellers rely on constant movement to avoid enforcement. That increases fuel consumption significantly. A person sleeping in an RV may spend $300 to $600 per month just to relocate and avoid parking citations. Repairs, oil changes, and wear accumulate faster when vehicles are used as homes. Parking has also become a financial risk. Overnight bans, permit systems, and enforcement zones mean tickets can stack up quickly. Multiple citations often lead to towing. A single tow can cost $1,500 to $4,000 in fees, storage, and release charges. Money most vehicle dwellers do not have. Once a vehicle is impounded, the crisis escalates. Without shelter or transportation, people lose jobs, miss court dates, and fall deeper into poverty. This is how vehicle living turns from a temporary solution into a long-term trap. What began as a cost-saving survival tactic is becoming increasingly expensive and dangerous. As cities tighten enforcement and costs rise, millions of Americans are discovering that even living in a vehicle is no longer affordable. But they have nowhere else to go. Across the United States, cities are responding to visible vehicle living not with housing solutions, but with enforcement. Since 2022, hundreds of municipalities have passed or expanded overnight parking bans, RV-specific ordinances, size limits, and time restrictions. These laws are often framed as traffic or sanitation rules, but their practical effect is to make sleeping in a vehicle illegal. Many ordinances limit parking to 2 to 4 hours, prohibit habitation, or ban oversized vehicles entirely. Others require permits that are capped or impossible to obtain without proof of residence, something vehicle dwellers do not have. Enforcement typically occurs overnight or before sunrise, when people are asleep and least able to relocate safely. Cities justify these actions by citing complaints, sanitation concerns, or emergency access. However, most provide no alternative shelter, and existing shelters are frequently full or incompatible with families, pets, or people who work overnight shifts. This creates a cycle of displacement. Vehicle dwellers are forced to move nightly, burning fuel, missing sleep, and risking citations. Each move increases stress and decreases the ability to maintain employment. What was once a temporary survival strategy becomes a constant state of legal vulnerability. Criminalization does not reduce homelessness, it hides it. People are pushed into industrial zones, unsafe areas, or constant motion. The result is not cleaner cities, but a population living under continuous threat of tickets, towing, or arrest simply for existing without a lease. Towing is the most devastating enforcement tool cities use against vehicle dwellers. One citation can escalate quickly into impoundment, especially when multiple parking violations stack up. The financial impact is immediate and catastrophic. Average tow and impound fees range from $1,500 to over $4,000, depending on city, vehicle size, and storage duration. For someone living in their vehicle, impoundment is not just a fine. It is the loss of their home, transportation, documents, medication, and personal belongings all at once. Many impound lots charge daily storage fees, making retrieval impossible after just a few days. Without a vehicle, people miss work, lose income, and cannot attend court dates or job interviews. This often results in additional penalties, warrants, or job termination. The cascade happens fast. What started as a parking violation becomes full-scale homelessness within days. Cities claim towing is a last resort, but data shows it is increasingly common. In some West Coast cities, vehicle-related tows increased by 30 to 50% after new enforcement rules were introduced. RVs are especially targeted due to size and visibility. Once a vehicle is lost, recovery is rare. Few people can raise thousands of dollars on short notice. Many vehicles are eventually auctioned, permanently severing a person's path back to stability. Towing does not solve homelessness. It locks it in permanently. One of the most misunderstood aspects of vehicle homelessness is employment. A significant portion of people living in cars and RVs are working full-time or part-time jobs. Studies and school district reports show that 40 to 60% of unhoused adults in some regions are employed, often in essential roles. These individuals work in warehouses, hospitals, retail stores, restaurants, construction sites, and transportation hubs. They wake up in parking lots, industrial zones, or roadside areas, then clock in like everyone else. The difference is that they have no address to go home to. Living in a vehicle allows proximity to work, which shelters often do not. Shelters may require nightly check-ins, restrict hours, or be located far from job centers. For people working early mornings, late nights, or rotating shifts, shelters are not functional options. However, the lack of an IP address creates systemic barriers. Employers require mailing addresses, insurance companies demand residency, and banks flag accounts. Simple tasks like renewing licenses, receiving prescriptions, or enrolling children in school become complex. This population is largely invisible in official statistics because they do not fit traditional definitions of homelessness. They are not sleeping on sidewalks. They are sleeping in vehicles after work. That invisibility allows the crisis to grow unchecked, even as millions of working Americans quietly lose housing stability every year. Older Americans are increasingly represented among vehicle dwellers. Fixed incomes from Social Security average roughly $1,900 per month, while average rents in many regions now exceed $1,600 to $2,000. This leaves little to nothing for food, healthcare, or transportation. Many seniors are priced out after rent increases, medical expenses, or the death of a spouse. Once displaced, re-entering the rental market is nearly impossible due to income screening requirements and limited senior housing availability. Waiting lists for subsidized senior housing often exceed 2 to 5 years. RVs and vehicles become a last resort. Older RVs offer insulation, space, and familiarity, but they also require maintenance, fuel, and physical ability to manage repairs. Seniors face higher risks of heat exposure, cold stress, and medical emergencies while living in vehicles. Healthcare access becomes critical. Missed medications, delayed treatments, and lack of refrigeration for insulin or other drugs increase hospitalization rates. Emergency rooms become the primary point of care, raising public healthcare costs. This is not a fringe trend. Social service agencies report sharp increases in seniors seeking help for vehicle living situations. The idea that retirement guarantees stability is collapsing. For many older Americans, the final chapter of life is being spent in parking lots, not by choice, but by economic force. The promise of secure retirement has become a memory for millions. Cold weather exposes the deadly limits of vehicle living. During winter months, vehicle dwellers face hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, and fire risks. Running engines for heat increases fuel costs and creates carbon monoxide hazards. Using propane heaters or improvised heating devices raises fire risk. Cold-related deaths among unhoused populations spike each winter. In some regions, winter exposure deaths increased by 20 to 40% during severe cold seasons. Vehicles offer minimal insulation, especially older cars and RVs not designed for sub-freezing temperatures. Fuel costs rise sharply as people idle engines overnight. A single cold night can burn several gallons of fuel, making survival increasingly expensive. Mechanical failures are also more common in winter, and a dead battery or frozen engine can instantly eliminate shelter. Cities often increase enforcement during winter due to emergency declarations or snow removal rules, forcing people to move in dangerous conditions. Shelters may be full, inaccessible, or unsafe for families and seniors. Winter exposes the truth of the crisis. Vehicle living is not sustainable, safe, or humane, yet millions are forced into it because the housing system has no place for them. Cold weather does not create the crisis. It reveals it, often with fatal consequences. Every winter, more people die in vehicles that were never meant to be homes, victims of an economic system that has left them nowhere else to turn. One of the least visible consequences of the cost of living crisis is the rise in families living in cars and RVs. School districts across the country report growing numbers of students classified as housing insecure, meaning they sleep in vehicles, motels, or temporary setups. Federal education data already counted over 1.3 million homeless students, and vehicle living is one of the fastest growing subcategories. Parents keep this hidden out of fear of child protective services, school stigma, or losing custody. Children attend school during the day, complete homework, and participate in activities, while nights are spent in parking lots or moving locations to avoid enforcement. Vehicles provide privacy that shelters often cannot, especially for families with multiple children. Financially, families are hit hardest by upfront housing barriers. Even when parents are working, saving $6,000 to $10,000 for deposits is unrealistic when food, childcare, and transportation costs are already elevated. Motel living is often worse, costing $2,500 to $4,000 per month, pushing families back into vehicles. Children living in vehicles face higher absenteeism, sleep deprivation, and stress-related health issues. Yet many remain invisible because they are not sleeping on sidewalks. Vehicle living allows families to function temporarily, but it delays access to long-term help. This is not a failure of parenting. It is a failure of affordability. RV parks were once considered a low-cost alternative to traditional housing. That has changed rapidly. Monthly RV park rates now commonly range from $900 to $1,500, with premium locations exceeding $2,000 per month. These prices rival apartment rents, but offer none of the legal protections tenants receive. Many parks require background checks, long-term commitments, and proof of income, criteria that exclude people already displaced. Others restrict older RVs, limit stay lengths, or ban full-time residency altogether. As demand rises, availability shrinks, utility costs add further pressure. Electricity, propane, water, and sewer fees often push total monthly RV living costs well beyond expectations. Combined with insurance, fuel, and maintenance, RV living can exceed $2,000 per month, making it unsustainable for low-income households. As RV parks transition toward short-term tourism models, displaced residents are pushed back onto streets and parking lots. This removes one of the last semi-stable housing alternatives available to people priced out of apartments. The result is a bottleneck: too expensive for parks, illegal on streets, and inaccessible shelters. RV parks are no longer absorbing housing pressure. They are reflecting it. What was once a safety valve is now another closed door, leaving vehicle dwellers with fewer options every month as prices climb and restrictions multiply across the country. Legal shifts have accelerated enforcement against vehicle dwellers. Recent court decisions clarified that cities may enforce camping and parking bans even when shelter capacity is limited. While rulings vary by jurisdiction, the practical effect has been a green light for aggressive enforcement. Cities interpreted these decisions as permission to clear vehicles, issue citations, and tow without providing alternatives. Enforcement budgets increased, and police departments were instructed to resume sweeps that had paused during earlier legal uncertainty. For vehicle dwellers, this removed the last layer of protection. Previously, many relied on legal ambiguity to remain in place temporarily. Now, enforcement is more consistent and less restrained. Citations escalate faster, and tolerance windows have narrowed. This shift disproportionately affects those using vehicles as their only shelter. Unlike tent encampments, vehicles are easy to target and remove. A single tow eliminates both housing and transportation, making recovery far more difficult. The legal system did not create homelessness, but it reshaped how visible and survivable it is. With enforcement expanding and housing still inaccessible, courts have indirectly accelerated displacement without addressing root causes. The message is clear: living in a vehicle is now more dangerous and less tolerated than ever before. The window for survival is closing, and millions of Americans are being pushed into an impossible position with no legal recourse and nowhere to go. Enforcement is rising while solutions remain absent. Living in a vehicle under threat of enforcement creates extreme psychological stress. Constant movement disrupts sleep, routines, and emotional stability. People report chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, and exhaustion from scanning for police, security, or complaints. Sleep deprivation alone has severe consequences. Irregular rest impacts decision-making, job performance, and physical health. Over time, this leads to depression, irritability, and emotional shutdown. For families and seniors, the effects are compounded. Mental health services are largely inaccessible without stable housing. Missed appointments, lack of transportation after towing, and inability to store medications worsen conditions. Crisis episodes increase, but treatment options decrease. This environment turns temporary hardship into long-term trauma. People are not failing to cope. The system is forcing instability. When survival requires constant relocation, long-term planning becomes impossible. Mental health decline is not a side effect of vehicle living. It is a predictable outcome of enforced instability. The longer displacement continues, the harder it becomes for people to re-enter stable housing, even if financial conditions improve. The psychological toll is invisible but devastating. People who were once stable, employed, and mentally healthy are being ground down by a system that criminalizes poverty and offers no path forward. The damage being done to millions of Americans will echo for years, even if housing suddenly became affordable tomorrow. Trauma does not heal quickly. Vehicle living is no longer confined to high-cost coastal cities. Midwestern, southern, and mountain states are now seeing rapid increases as rents rise and wages stagnate. States once considered affordable now face the same affordability gaps. Insurance hikes, property tax increases, and housing shortages are spreading nationally. As people relocate seeking cheaper living, demand rises in new regions, driving prices up again. This creates a rolling affordability crisis with no relief zone. Rural areas offer fewer services, fewer jobs, and fewer shelters. Vehicle dwellers in these regions face isolation, limited healthcare access, and harsher weather conditions. Enforcement may be less visible, but resources are also scarcer. The narrative that people can just move somewhere cheaper no longer holds. The crisis is systemic, not regional. It follows wage structures, not geography. Vehicle living is becoming a nationwide indicator of economic stress, not a localized anomaly. When cars become homes across all regions, it signals a structural failure, not a temporary imbalance. What started in California and Oregon is now showing up in Oklahoma, Tennessee, Arizona, and Montana. Small towns that never had visible homelessness are now seeing RVs parked permanently on side streets. The American housing crisis is no longer coastal. It is everywhere, and it is getting worse in places with the fewest resources to respond. This is a national emergency in slow motion. All indicators suggest vehicle homelessness will continue rising. Interest rates remain elevated, limiting new housing construction. Insurance premiums, property taxes, and municipal enforcement budgets are increasing. Meanwhile, wages remain flat relative to living costs. New zoning restrictions, RV bans, and parking enforcement plans are already scheduled for rollout in many cities. As legal clarity increases, tolerance decreases. The window for informal survival strategies is closing. At the same time, safety nets are shrinking. Emergency rental assistance funds are depleted, shelters are overcrowded, and affordable housing pipelines are years behind demand. Millions are one financial shock, away from displacement. Vehicle living is not a solution, it is a warning signal. When cars and RVs become default housing, it means traditional systems have failed to absorb economic pressure. Without structural changes, this crisis will not stabilize. It will compound. More enforcement, fewer options, and rising costs create a feedback loop that pushes more Americans into vehicles each year. What is happening now is not the peak. It is the beginning of a larger displacement cycle already in motion. The next 2 years will see millions more Americans forced into vehicles, not because they made bad choices, but because the system has run out of room for them. The trajectory is clear, the warnings are everywhere, and nothing is being done to stop it. This isn't rock bottom. This is the moment before things get much worse. In our next video, we break down how cities and states are quietly changing laws that make living in cars and RVs illegal almost overnight, and why millions are about to be pushed even further. Do you believe this is a temporary collapse or a permanent new reality? Tell us in the comments.